So we're talking now about the Obama housing scorecard with Shawn Yesner from the Law Firm Yesner Boss. Shawn, we were talking in the break a little bit about some of the government-backed modification, short sale, foreclosure prevention alternatives. There's so many acronyms. Us in the real estate industry, we'll say HAMP and HAFA and all these things, and the consumer's like, what in the world are you talking about? What's HAMP? It sounds like a drug, So I just want to take a couple minutes and maybe touch on a couple of these individual programs that are the most common ones that we get questions about, and let the consumer know what they are. So the first one I wanted to ask you about was HAMP, the Home Affordable Modification Program. What is HAMP?
Taking a step back for a second, the interesting thing about all these programs is that both the U.S. and the Florida Constitution say that the government can't interfere with the private contracts between individuals. And that's basically what a note and mortgage are, a private contract between bank, lender, and borrower. So the government rather, has no mechanism to force any of these programs on the banks. The banks have to say, yeah, they'll participate.
Right.
HAMP is basically President Obama's modification program. If you meet certain guidelines, the most common one is 31%. If the bank can reduce the amount of your mortgage payment to 31% of your gross income.
So the debt-to-income ratio of 31% is a requirement. There was some discussion of removing that, I think, at one point. But how successful has HAMP been?
In our experience, not very. The banks, what we hear, the biggest complaint we hear about HAMP is that the banks ask borrowers for documents over and over and over and over. Say they lose documents, they're missing what was in the middle of the package that the bank sent them, and then the banks will get to the point where they'll say, well, you just haven't provided all the documentation. We're denying your HAMP modification, but oh, by the way, we have our own internal bank modification program that mirrors HAMP, and you may qualify for that.
So I'm not going to call it bait and switch, but if it looks like, if it sounds like...
Well, yeah, and the statistics show that on the modifications, too, extremely high percentage of those they default anyway, because you got to think
it's a Band-Aid.
Well, yeah, let's say they drop your payment. You're in a home that you owe $250,000 on, and it's now worth $100,000, and your credit's already trashed because you had to be late for them to entertain the modification to begin with. They modify it. It's affordable now, but the people are sitting there, thinking, well, I've already paid the price, so to speak. My credit's trashed, and here I am.
Almost 20% of the people that have done it have redefaulted.
Yeah. Well, and the other problem with that is, let's assume the borrower does get on a modification that makes the plan affordable. In Nate's example, the house is still $150,000 upside down.
Right.
Unless the homeowner has a long-term plan to stay in that house,
doesn't make sense.
It's going to be a short sale 5-10 years down the road anyway.
Yep. One of the other programs, HAFA, Shawn, HAFA, the Home Affordable Foreclosure Alternative Program. Touch on that a little bit.
That is basically the short sale program, the government-sponsored short sale program. If HAMP is unavailable, if the borrower fails to qualify for HAMP, then the bank will evaluate
them. Or if they don't want the home.
Or if they don't want the home.
Right.
Typically, though, in order to qualify for HAFA, they have to go through the HAMP analysis.
Okay.
But then once they qualify for HAFA, that is basically the government-sponsored short sale program. The good thing about HAMP is there are provisions in there for borrowers to get some money back, a couple $1,000
for moving expenses,
moving assistance. But that's HAFA. Again, we see very few of them. We don't see that they're that successful that the banks are really taking advantage of them to the extent.
And it's the same one, 31% debt to income ratio, which I think it was lifted. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure the 31% provision was lifted. But
well, and again, that's because they have to go through the HAMP analysis.
Gotcha. And so, and again, that brings up another note, and we've been talking about this for a while. I think the banks are finally starting to realize that these situations, there's a lot of business decisions involved in them. We're getting homeowners offered money, not through HAFA, but through, J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, offering money to homeowners to short sell the property. Significant amounts of money, because I think the banks are starting to realize, look, if we do go all the way to foreclosure and we spend 638 days before we get any money, and then we get this house, there's 2 years of deferred maintenance, 2 years of risk, 2 years of vandalism, 2 years of the appliances getting stolen, all these kind of things. It's a business decision for them to say, you know what, let's just call it a day.
2 years of association dues.
Right.
Yep.
2 years.
Possible depreciation in sales prices.
Which, no doubt about it. So I think we're starting to see, and I will commend the banks and the system on this, it is starting to get better in terms of how quickly they answer a short sale, how realistic they are, how reasonable they are at looking at, you know, kind of the gray area of the transaction, like how bad the condition is. You know, we'll sometimes have a BPO done on a property where the guy drove by, took a picture with his camera phone, and spent about 13 seconds filling out a silly, stupid report that says the home is worth X, when it's clear that if he'd have gone inside, there's a hole in the roof, and there's water all over the place, and there's mold, and it's worth half of what he thought it was because of all the work that's needed that he didn't go in and look at, you know. And so they're starting to get a little more reasonable about that, which is somewhat beneficial. So